Ethan and Maya Vance vanished from the shores of Serpent Lake in Washington's Cascade Mountains on October 12, 1985. One moment they were there, a young couple on the precipice of their future, their pickup truck parked by the water's edge. The next, they were gone. For 17 long years, their disappearance was a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered by locals about the unforgiving wilderness. The case was a collection of unanswered questions and faded photographs. It was a cold, silent mystery buried under nearly 2 decades of snow, rumor, and time. Then, in the summer of 2002, a routine geological survey made a chilling discovery deep beneath the placid surface of the lake. It was a discovery that would not only solve the mystery of what happened to the Vances, but would also unravel a dark conspiracy of greed and murder that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The truth was far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined, and it was about to claw its way to the surface. Ethan Vance was a man built of earth and ambition. At 28, he was a geologist with a fire in his belly and a mind that saw the world not just as mountains and valleys, but as a complex blueprint of valuable secrets waiting to be unearthed. He was brilliant, driven, and possessed an almost reckless optimism. He believed that with enough hard work and a little bit of luck, he could carve out a legacy for himself and his family. Ethan wasn't motivated by simple greed. For him, it was about the thrill of the discovery, the intellectual challenge of decoding the land's hidden language. He spoke of mineral veins and fault lines with the passion of a poet describing a lover. His hands, often stained with dirt and rock dust, were surprisingly gentle. He had grown up in a modest home, the son of a high school science teacher who had instilled in him a profound curiosity about the natural world. From a young age, Ethan was the boy who came home with his pockets full of interesting rocks, not marbles. He saw his work as a direct path to providing a life for Maya that he felt she deserved, a life of security and freedom where her art could flourish without financial constraint. His ultimate goal, the one that occupied his thoughts and fueled his long hours, was to stake a major mineral claim. It was the modern-day equivalent of a gold rush, a high-stakes gamble that could either secure their future forever or end in bitter failure. He was on the verge of what he believed was the discovery of a lifetime, a massive deposit of molybdenum, a mineral vital for strengthening steel, hidden in the remote mountains flanking Serpent Lake. This wasn't just a job for him, it was his magnum opus. Maya Vance was the vibrant, beating heart to Ethan's analytical mind. At 26, she was an artist, her chosen medium the wild, untamed landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. While Ethan mapped the Earth's bones, Maya captured its soul on canvas. Her paintings were bursts of color and emotion, filled with the deep greens of the pines, the moody grays of the ever-present mist, and the brilliant blues of the alpine lakes. She was warm, empathetic, and had a laugh that could make a room feel brighter. She was the grounding force in Ethan's life, the one who reminded him to look up from his maps and see the beauty of the world he was so intent on analyzing. Maya was incredibly close to her family, especially her younger sister, Sarah, who was just 19 at the time. They spoke on the phone almost every day, sharing secrets, dreams, and the mundane details of their lives. Maya was the protective older sister, always offering advice and encouragement. She and Ethan had been married for 4 years, a relationship built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared dreams. They had met in college. He was a geology student giving a guest lecture to an art class about the geological formations that inspired famous landscape painters, and she was the student in the front row who challenged his purely scientific perspective. Their connection was immediate and profound. They had recently started talking about starting a family. Maya dreamed of raising their children in a small house with a big garden, surrounded by the nature that inspired her. She had a sketchbook filled with drawings of a future home, complete with a swing set and a studio with a large north-facing window. She was a planner, a dreamer, a person who lived with an open heart. Her life was full of love and purpose. She had everything to live for: her art, which was just beginning to gain local recognition, her deep bond with her sister, and the beautiful future she was meticulously planning with the man she adored. The life that was stolen from them wasn't just an existence. It was a tapestry of hopes, connections, and immense potential. A future rich with love and creativity that was just about to begin. The loss was not just the end of 2 lives. but the erasure of all the lives they were meant to touch. The day they disappeared, October 12, 1985, began with the crisp, clean promise of a perfect autumn morning. A low-lying mist clung to the valleys of the Cascade Mountains, but the sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Ethan had been meticulously planning this weekend trip for weeks. His preliminary surveys and geological maps all pointed to one specific remote quadrant near Serpent Lake as the epicenter of a massive molybdenum deposit. It was a rugged, isolated area, accessible only by a winding, often treacherous logging road. Securing the physical claim required planting stakes and gathering core samples from the precise location, a task that couldn't be done from a distance. He was buzzing with an almost electric excitement. This trip, he told Maya, was the one that would change everything. Maya, ever supportive and always eager for an escape into the wilderness that fueled her art, packed her sketchbooks, a set of charcoal pencils, and a thermos of hot tea. She saw the trip not as a business venture, but as another adventure with Ethan, a chance to capture the stark, lonely beauty of the high country as autumn turned the leaves to fire. Their faded blue Ford pickup truck was loaded with surveying equipment, camping gear, and enough supplies for 2 nights. Ethan had double-checked everything: the seismic sensors, the core drill, the GPS locator, which was a new and expensive piece of technology for the time. He had also packed a heavy-duty winch and chains, acknowledging the poor condition of the final stretch of road to the lake. The decision to go in mid-October was a calculated risk. The weather in the Cascades could turn in an instant. A freak snowstorm could easily render the logging roads impassable, trapping them for days. Ethan, however, had checked the long-range forecast, which promised a clear, stable weather window for the next 72 hours. It was a gamble, but the potential reward was immeasurable. They left their small home in the Seattle suburbs just after dawn, Maya's hand resting on Ethan's knee as he drove. The cab of the truck filled with easy conversation and the scent of coffee. They stopped once, at a small, greasy spoon diner in a town called Skykomish, the last real outpost of civilization before the deep woods. They were laughing, talking about the future. The waitress, a woman named Carol, would later remember them clearly. She recalled Ethan spreading a topographical map across their table, his finger tracing a route with infectious enthusiasm, while Maya sketched the worn-out chrome of the napkin dispenser in her book. They seemed so happy, so full of life. After their meal, they continued east, climbing higher into the mountains. The paved highway soon gave way to gravel, and then to a deeply rutted dirt track. The trees grew thicker, crowding the road and plunging the truck into a deep, primeval shade. Around 2 in the afternoon, they passed a lone hunter gutting a deer on the side of the road. The man, a local named Dale, nodded at them as they passed. He would be one of the last people to see them alive. He later told police their truck seemed heavily loaded, and the man driving looked intensely focused. The woman in the passenger seat smiled and waved. The final approach to Serpent Lake was the most difficult. The road narrowed to a single lane, a muddy scar carved into the mountainside with a steep, unforgiving drop-off to one side. Ethan had to engage the 4-wheel drive, the engine groaning as the tires fought for purchase in the slick mud. This was the final, critical leg of their journey. Every turn, every slick patch of clay was a potential point of failure. It was a fatal mistake that would create a legend, a final journey into a wilderness that was about to swallow them whole. They reached the lake just before 3 o'clock, parking the truck in a small, grassy clearing a few dozen yards from the water's edge. The place was utterly deserted. The only sounds were the wind sighing through the pines and the distant call of a raven. Ethan immediately began unloading his equipment, his energy palpable. Maya took out her sketchbook and walked toward the shoreline, captivated by the way the sunlight fractured on the dark, still water. What happened next would remain a mystery for years, a blank space in the timeline filled only with speculation and fear. The first sign that something was wrong came not with a bang, but with a quiet, creeping dread. Ethan and Maya were due back on Sunday evening, October 13th. When Monday morning arrived and Ethan hadn't shown up for a critical meeting at his geology firm, his boss, a pragmatic man named Mr. Abernathy, made the first call. He dialed their home number. No answer. He tried again an hour later. Still silence. He called Maya's sister, Sarah, to see if she had heard from them. Sarah's voice was laced with a nervous energy she was trying to suppress. She confirmed they were supposed to be back the previous night, and that she hadn't been able to reach them. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in her stomach. By Monday afternoon, the anxiety had bloomed into full-blown panic. Sarah, accompanied by Mr. Abernathy and two of Ethan's concerned colleagues, made the drive up to the mountains. They followed the same route Ethan had marked on the map he'd left on his desk. The drive felt unnervingly long, the silence in the car thick with unspoken fears. When they reached the turnoff for the final logging road to Serpent Lake, they found a small, hastily made roadblock of fallen branches. It was strange, but not immediately alarming. Hunters or loggers sometimes blocked roads for various reasons. One of Ethan's colleagues, a burly man named Frank, got out and easily cleared the path. As they navigated the treacherous final stretch, the sense of foreboding grew. The road was slick with mud, and deep tire tracks, which they assumed belonged to Ethan's Ford, were visible heading toward the lake. There were no tracks coming back. They found the truck exactly where Maya's sister had pictured it, in the clearing by the water. It was unlocked. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just stepped out. The scene was eerily still. A cold wind rustled the pines, and the lake was a dark, unblinking eye. Inside the truck, the keys were still in the ignition. Maya's sketchbook lay open on the passenger seat, a half-finished charcoal drawing of the lake's far shore on the page. A single delicate pencil lay beside it. In the truck bed, some of the camping gear was undisturbed. A tent still in its bag, 2 sleeping bags, a cooler. But Ethan's specialized geological equipment, the expensive core drill and the seismic sensors, was gone. His rucksack, which he always kept packed with survival gear, was also missing. On the ground near the passenger side door, they found a single spent shotgun shell. It was for a 12-gauge, common for hunting in the area, but it felt deeply out of place. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no footprints other than their own, and the faint days-old impressions from Ethan and Maya's boots. It was as if the couple had simply stepped out of their truck and evaporated into the thin mountain air. Frank, the colleague, walked the perimeter of the clearing, his voice echoing as he called their names. Ethan, Maya. Only the wind answered. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. The serene beauty of the place had curdled into something menacing. This wasn't a place of adventure. It was a place of terrible silence. Mr. Abernathy, using a bulky, primitive car phone, made the call to the county sheriff's department. His voice was strained, trying to remain calm as he relayed the information. Yes, my employee, Ethan Vance, and his wife. Their truck is here at Serpent Lake, but they're gone. The keys are in it. It looks like they just walked away. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was professional but distant. Sir, are there any signs of foul play? Abernathy looked at the shotgun shell in his hand, then at the vast, silent wilderness surrounding them. I don't know, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I just know it's wrong. Everything about this is wrong. The initial search was about to begin, but the mystery had already taken root. The official search for Ethan and Maya Vance began with a surge of determined optimism that was swiftly and brutally crushed by the unforgiving realities of the Cascade Wilderness and a cascade of human error. Within hours of Mr. Abernathy's call, the King County Sheriff's Department had established a command post near the entrance to the logging road. The initial deployment was impressive. Dozens of deputies and search and rescue volunteers, clad in bright orange, fanned out from the abandoned truck, forming grid lines to comb the dense forest. K-9 units were brought in, their handlers letting them scent Maya's scarf and a t-shirt from Ethan's gym bag. For the first few hours, there was a palpable sense of hope. The dogs seemed to catch a scent, leading a team down a faint game trail that wound away from the lake and deeper into the woods. The trail was faint, the ground covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that held little evidence. After a quarter of a mile, the dogs became confused, circling aimlessly before losing the trail completely. The handlers speculated that the scent had simply dissipated in the cold, windy conditions. It was the first of many dead ends. The external conflicts began almost immediately. On the second day of the search, the stable weather window Ethan had gambled on slammed shut. A massive, unforecasted Arctic front swept down from Canada, bringing with it freezing rain that quickly turned to heavy, wet snow. Temperatures plummeted. The search was immediately hampered. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the fresh snowfall obliterated any potential tracks or signs they might have missed. The logging road became a treacherous river of mud and slush, making it nearly impossible to get vehicles and supplies to the primary search area. The command post was forced to retreat several miles down the mountain. The searchers, now battling hypothermia as much as the terrain, were forced to pull back. The family's frustration, particularly Sarah's, grew with each passing hour. She felt they were losing precious time, that every moment of delay was a death sentence for her sister and brother-in-law. She pleaded with the sheriff in charge, a man named Henderson, to send the teams back out, to do more. Henderson, a veteran lawman worn down by years of dealing with tragedies in these same mountains, was sympathetic but firm. He explained that sending his people into a blizzard was a suicide mission. His words did little to comfort the family, who felt helpless, watching from the sidelines as nature itself conspired against them. A tragic accident then struck the heart of the operation. A private helicopter, hired by Ethan's desperate firm to conduct an aerial survey, clipped a treetop in the swirling winds and poor visibility. The chopper crashed into a steep wooded ravine. The pilot was killed instantly, and the spotter was severely injured. The search for Ethan and Maya was now tragically diverted into a recovery and rescue mission for the helicopter crew. The incident cast a dark pall over the entire effort and consumed critical resources for more than a day. The family's desperation turned into a quiet, simmering anger. It felt like the universe was actively working to keep the truth hidden. When the weather finally cleared 2 days later, the landscape was buried under 2 feet of snow. The search resumed, but it was a different kind of search now. The hope of finding them alive had faded, replaced by the grim determination to find their bodies. The methodology of the search was thorough but flawed, crippled by a critical misdirection. The discovery of the spent shotgun shell and the faint scent trail leading away from the lake had led investigators to a fatal assumption that the couple had been accosted by a hunter or some other individual, and had either been marched into the woods or had fled into them. Consequently, 95% of the search and rescue resources were focused on the vast, million-acre forest surrounding Serpent Lake. They searched ravines, old mining shafts, and dense thickets. They rappelled down cliffs and waded through icy streams. The lake itself was given only a cursory glance. A small boat from the sheriff's department spent a single afternoon dragging a simple grappling hook across the shallower sections near the shore. They found nothing but submerged logs and rocks. Sheriff Henderson, convinced the answer lay in the woods, deemed a more extensive underwater search an unnecessary expense and a low-probability effort. He argued that if their truck was on the shore, they couldn't be in the water. It was a logical conclusion that was disastrously wrong. This misdirection may not have been simple incompetence. Unbeknownst to the searchers, a key county official, who had the authority to allocate resources for the expensive and complex task of a deep-water search, had been quietly paid off. A sum of money from Marcus Thorne, the local businessman, ensured that the official would steer Henderson and the investigation firmly away from the lake, reinforcing the theory that the couple had vanished into the forest. Weeks turned into a month. The official search was scaled back, then officially called off as winter tightened its grip on the mountains. The case of Ethan and Maya Vance was no longer an active search and rescue mission. It was now a cold case. The years that followed the failed search were a long, slow grind of silence and sorrow. For the families of Ethan and Maya Vance, the absence of answers was a unique and cruel form of torture. There were no bodies to bury, no grave to visit, no finality to allow the process of grieving to truly begin. Their lives became suspended in a state of perpetual, agonizing uncertainty. Every knock on the door, every ringing phone, carried a flicker of hope that was just as quickly extinguished. The case file, once thick with active leads and search grids, was relegated to a dusty shelf in the King County Sheriff's Office, a testament to a mystery the mountains had refused to solve. Maya's sister, Sarah, found her life irrevocably altered. The vibrant, carefree young woman of 19 was replaced by a haunted, determined adult who refused to let the world forget. She became the keeper of their memory, a relentless advocate for her missing sister. Every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, she would place an ad in the local newspaper with their pictures, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. She organized vigils, wrote letters to politicians, and hounded a succession of sheriffs, each one less interested in the cold case than the last. Her persistence was seen by some as noble and by others as a desperate obsession, a refusal to accept the unacceptable. Ethan's parents, devastated by the loss of their only son, retreated into a quiet, private grief. His father, the retired science teacher, would spend hours poring over Ethan's geological maps, trying to find some clue, some reason, some pattern in the chaos that had consumed his son. The couple's home was eventually sold, its contents packed away into boxes that served as a painful archive of a life cut short. In the local community and among the hikers and hunters who frequented the Cascade backcountry, the story of the vanished couple morphed into something else. It became a piece of grim folklore. Serpent Lake, once just a remote fishing spot, now carried a chilling reputation. The clearing where the truck was found became an unofficial, unspoken landmark. People would point it out, their voices hushed. "That's where the Vances disappeared," they would say. Over time, the story took on a mythic quality. Some whispered they had been victims of a Sasquatch. Others believed they had stumbled upon a drug operation deep in the woods and had been silenced. The most pervasive and poetic theory, however, gave Maya a new, tragic name. Because she was an artist who had gone into the wilderness and never returned, she became known in local legend as Sleeping Beauty, a beautiful soul put to sleep by the mountains, waiting to be found. The name was both beautiful and terrible, capturing the romantic tragedy and the deep-seated hopelessness of the situation. The abandoned logging road that led to the lake was eventually gated and locked by the Forestry Service, deemed too dangerous for public use. This only added to the lake's mystique, making it a forbidden place, a location shrouded in mystery and sorrow. The case became a symbol of the wild's power to erase, to swallow people whole without a trace. For 17 years, this was the status quo. The mystery was a permanent fixture, a deep wound in the community's collective memory that had scarred over but never healed. The hope that had once burned so brightly in the hearts of their family had dwindled to a faint, flickering ember, kept alive only by the stubborn will of a sister who refused to let it die. The world had moved on, but for those who loved them, time had stopped on that cold October day in 1985. For 17 years, the silence from Serpent Lake was absolute. The case of Ethan and Maya Vance was a fossil, a story preserved in the amber of rumor and memory. Then, in the bright, warm summer of 2002, the catalyst for the truth arrived not with a thunderous breakthrough, but with the quiet hum of advanced technology. A team from the University of Washington's Oceanography Department had been granted a special permit to use Serpent Lake as a testing ground for a new piece of equipment, a state-of-the-art, high-resolution side-scan sonar system. The lake was chosen for its depth, its clear water, and its relative lack of boat traffic, making it a perfect, controlled environment to calibrate the sensitive device before deploying it for a major research project in the Puget Sound. The project had absolutely nothing to do with the Vance case. Most of the young graduate students on the team had never even heard the story of the vanished couple. Their goal was purely scientific, to create the first-ever complete bathymetric map of the lakebed, charting its hidden contours, depths, and geological features. For 3 days, their research boat methodically crisscrossed the lake, towing the torpedo-shaped sonar device, or towfish, just above the bottom. The device sent out fans of acoustic energy, and the returning echoes were translated by a powerful computer into a near-photographic image of the lake floor. On the 4th day, a student named Ben, staring intently at the laptop screen displaying the sonar feed, noticed something unusual. In the deepest part of the lake, a trench that plunged to over 300 feet, there was an anomaly. It was a large rectangular object, perfectly symmetrical and completely out of place among the natural rocks and silt. It was not a geological feature. It was man-made. He called over the project lead, a professor named Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch, a man who had spent his life looking at sonar images, leaned in for a closer look. He adjusted the contrast, zoomed in on the object, and his professional curiosity quickly turned to something more. The object had the unmistakable shape and size of a vehicle, a pickup truck to be precise. He knew the history of the area well enough to know that no roads led to this deep trench. No boat launch was nearby. There was no logical reason for a truck to be down there. A cold realization washed over him. He remembered the old stories, the local legend of the couple who vanished from the lake's shore. "Get the coordinates, Ben," Finch said, his voice quiet but firm. "Mark this exact location. We need to make a call." Dr. Finch contacted the King County Sheriff's Department. He was initially met with skepticism. The Vance case was ancient history, and the department was busy with current crimes. But Finch was persistent. He emailed the sonar images to a young, ambitious detective named David Reichert. Reichert was new to the homicide division, but he had grown up in the area and knew the story of the sleeping beauty of Serpent Lake. He was intrigued. Unlike the investigators from 1985, Reichert had access to resources and technology they could only have dreamed of. The sonar image was not a vague possibility. It was hard, compelling evidence. It was the first new lead in the case in 17 years. The coincidence was staggering. A scientific mission completely unrelated to the cold case had stumbled upon the one clue that had been missed, the one piece of the puzzle that lay hidden in the one place the original search had ignored. The discovery sent a jolt through the cold case unit. The fossil was no longer dormant. A 17-year-old mystery had just been violently reawakened. The sonar image acted like a key turning a rusted lock. Detective David Reichert, armed with the precise coordinates from Dr. Finch's team, immediately began assembling the resources for a deep water recovery operation. This was no simple task. Serpent Lake's deep trench was cold, dark, and dangerous. A specialized commercial dive team, the kind usually contracted for salvage operations on the coast, was brought in. They arrived with a barge, a crane, and a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, equipped with high-intensity lights and a camera. The atmosphere at the lake was thick with a mixture of excitement and solemnity. News crews, catching wind of the major development in the legendary case, were held back at the main road. Their long lenses pointed toward the distant water. Sarah, Maya's sister, was there, standing silently on the shore with a deputy assigned to stay with her. She had waited 17 years for this moment, and her face was a mask of hope and dread. The ROV was the first to go down. On the monitor aboard the barge, the team watched as the murky green water gave way to absolute blackness. The ROV's lights cut through the dark, illuminating a world of silt and rock that no human eye had ever seen. Then it appeared. Just as the sonar had shown, a faded blue Ford pickup truck rested on the lake bed, its tires sunk deep in the mud. It was covered in a thick layer of algae and sediment, a ghostly relic from another time. A collective gasp went through the crew on the barge. The ROV's camera slowly panned across the vehicle. The license plate was obscured, but the make and model were a perfect match for the Vance's truck. The windows were closed. The ROV's manipulator arm gently brushed sediment away from the driver's side window. Inside, the darkness was absolute, but the camera caught the faint, pale shapes of human remains. The recovery was a slow, painstaking process. Divers attached heavy-duty lift bags and cables to the truck's frame. The crane on the barge groaned under the strain as it began to winch the vehicle from its tomb of 17 years. Water streamed from the truck's rusted chassis as it broke the surface, emerging into the sunlight for the first time since 1985. It was a chilling, almost archaeological moment. The truck was carefully loaded onto a flatbed and transported to a secure forensic garage. The real investigation was just beginning. Reichert and his team, dressed in full protective gear, began the delicate task of examining the vehicle's contents. The interior was a time capsule, perfectly preserved in the cold, oxygen-deprived water. They recovered 2 skeletons, which dental records would quickly confirm were those of Ethan and Maya Vance. But as the forensic pathologist began her examination, she made a startling discovery. The hyoid bones in both skeletons were intact, ruling out strangulation. There were no signs of bludgeoning or knife marks on the bones. The initial cause of death was not immediately apparent. Then, a forensic technician, sifting through the thick layer of silt on the truck's floorboards, found it. A small, flattened piece of metal. It was a .38 caliber bullet. A second bullet was found lodged in the deteriorated foam of the passenger side door panel. Ethan and Maya Vance had not been victims of the wilderness. They hadn't gotten lost or had an accident. They had been murdered. The case was now officially a double homicide. Reichert's investigation pivoted with ferocious intensity. He reopened the original 1985 case file, poring over every witness statement and police report. He focused on the people who had a presence in the area at the time. The name of the hunter, Dale, who saw the couple on the road, came up. Reichert tracked him down. Dale was older now, but his memory was sharp. He confirmed his original story, but added a new detail he hadn't thought was important at the time. A few minutes after the Vance's blue truck passed him, another vehicle, a newer, dark green Jeep, had gone by, heading in the same direction. He remembered it because it seemed to be going unusually fast for that road. Reichert ran a search of 1985 vehicle registrations, cross-referencing them with a list of known associates and business rivals of Ethan Vance. The name Marcus Thorne immediately stood out. Thorne was now a multi-millionaire real estate developer, a pillar of the community. Back in 1985, he was an aggressive, up-and-coming businessman who specialized in acquiring mining claims. The file showed he had put in a bid for the land around Serpent Lake just weeks after the Vances disappeared. The dark green Jeep was registered to a man named Jacob Gallo, who had been Thorne's head of security and general fixer in the 80s. Reichert brought Gallo in for questioning. Gallo was now in his late 60s, in poor health, living in a small run-down apartment. He was no longer the imposing figure described in the old files. Faced with the new evidence, the recovered truck, the bullets, the eyewitness account of his Jeep, Gallo's carefully constructed wall of denial began to crumble. Reichert applied relentless pressure, laying out the forensic proof. After a grueling 6-hour interrogation, Jacob Gallo broke. In a halting, raspy voice, he confessed everything. He told them how his boss, Marcus Thorne, had learned from an inside source that Ethan's survey was about to prove the existence of a billion-dollar molybdenum deposit. Thorne tried to buy Ethan out, but Ethan, knowing the value of what he'd found, refused. Thorne, consumed by greed, decided to eliminate the problem. Gallo's confession was chillingly detailed. He described how he had followed the Vances up the logging road, ambushing them as they were unloading their gear by the lake. He shot them both with a .38 revolver, execution style. Then he put their bodies back in the truck, put it in neutral, and sent it rolling down the steep bank into the deep water, where he was certain it would never be found. He then drove back down the road and created the makeshift roadblock of branches to deter anyone from coming up before he was long gone. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The shotgun shell found at the scene in 1985? It was a plant, a piece of misdirection Gallo had thrown on the ground to make investigators think a random hunter was involved. The mystery of what happened to Ethan and Maya Vance was finally solved. The confession of Jacob Gallo sent shockwaves through the community. The arrest of Marcus Thorne was front-page news. Thorne, the silver-haired philanthropist and business magnate, was led from his sprawling waterfront mansion in handcuffs, his face a picture of disbelief and indignation. The narrative of the tragic wilderness accident, the legend of Sleeping Beauty, was shattered and replaced by a far uglier story of cold-blooded ambition and calculated murder. In the aftermath of the arrests, the full scope of the conspiracy was laid bare for the public to see. Gallo's detailed confession, given in exchange for a plea deal that would spare him the death penalty, became the backbone of the prosecution's case against Thorne. He explained the why with a chilling lack of remorse. It was purely business. Ethan Vance was an obstacle to a billion-dollar mineral claim. His wife, Maya, was simply collateral damage, a witness who had to be silenced. Thorne had planned the entire operation with a sociopath's precision. He knew Ethan's timeline and his destination from a contact he had inside the state's Geological Survey office. The murder itself was just the first step. The cover-up was equally crucial. Gallo revealed the name of the county official who, for the sum of $10,000 in 1985, had ensured the initial search efforts were focused exclusively on the land and not the lake. This official had subtly influenced Sheriff Henderson, reinforcing the lost in the woods theory and arguing that a deepwater search was an inefficient use of limited resources. The official had since retired and moved to Arizona, but Washington state authorities began extradition proceedings immediately. The case became a stark illustration of how a small thread of corruption could completely derail justice for decades. The prosecution meticulously laid out the chain of events for the jury. They presented the sonar images, the forensic evidence from the recovered truck, the ballistic match on the bullets, and the financial records showing Thorne's company acquiring the valuable mining rights just 6 months after the Vances vanished. A claim that had made him his first fortune and launched his empire. They painted a portrait of Thorne not as a community leader, but as a ruthless predator who built his success on the graves of 2 innocent people. Thorne's defense team tried to discredit Gallo as an unreliable, dying old man trying to settle a score. They argued that Thorne was a victim of a former employee's fantasy, but the weight of the evidence, combined with Gallo's disturbingly specific details, was overwhelming. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. Marcus Thorne was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jacob Gallo received a sentence of 25 years. The verdict brought a legal conclusion to the 17-year ordeal. The remains of Ethan and Maya Vance, which had been held as evidence, were finally released to their families. The identification process, while providing answers, was also a source of fresh pain, forcing the families to confront the violent reality of their loved ones' final moments. The what had been answered when the truck was pulled from the lake. Now, the why was understood in all its brutal simplicity. Greed. A future filled with art, love, and family had been traded for a vein of molybdenum in the ground. The revelation was not just the solution to a mystery. It was an indictment of a man who had hidden his monstrous nature behind a mask of wealth and respectability for nearly 2 decades. The day Marcus Thorne was sentenced, Sarah stood on the courthouse steps, not with a look of triumph, but with one of profound, bone-deep exhaustion. For 17 years, she had been a warrior, fighting a battle against silence and forgetting. Now, the war was over, but the victory felt hollow, steeped in the bitterness of all that had been lost. The resolution of the case was not a moment of pure relief, but a complex cocktail of emotions. There was relief, yes, a deep, shuddering exhalation that the not knowing was finally over, but it was tangled with a fresh, sharp wave of grief. The confirmation that Maya and Ethan had been murdered, their lives stolen in a moment of brutal violence, was infinitely more painful than the ambiguous tragedy of a wilderness accident. The legend of Sleeping Beauty was a sad story, but it had a certain romance to it. The reality of a cold-blooded execution for profit was just ugly. For Sarah, the most important outcome was the recovery of their bodies. After the trial, she arranged for a small, private funeral. It was a gray, drizzling day, so typical of the Pacific Northwest. She buried them together in a small cemetery overlooking the Puget Sound. For the first time, she had a place to visit, a stone to touch, a focal point for her grief. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, the kind Maya used to love to paint. It was a final, painful act of closure. Ethan's elderly parents were there, frail and stooped with age and sorrow. His father clutched one of the polished rocks from Ethan's childhood collection in his hand. The discovery and trial had taken a heavy toll on them, forcing them to relive their worst nightmare in excruciating public detail. Yet there was also a quiet dignity in their presence, a sense of a promise fulfilled. They finally knew what had happened to their son. They could mourn him properly. Detective David Reichert also attended the funeral, standing discreetly at the back. The case had become personal for him. He had not just solved a crime, he felt he had brought justice to a ghost story that had haunted his community for his entire life. He saw the resolution not just in the prison sentences, but in this quiet moment of remembrance. He saw it in the face of Sarah, who, despite her sorrow, no longer carried the frantic, desperate energy of the searcher. She was now a mourner, a role that, while painful, allowed for a path forward. After the service, Sarah approached Reichert, and for the first time she cried. They weren't the frantic tears of fear or frustration he had seen before, but tears of deep, cathartic release. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You brought my sister home. For the families, the years wasted could never be recovered. The void left by Ethan and Maya would never be filled." But the truth, as ugly as it was, had a certain power. It replaced the torment of the unknown with the certainty of the known. It allowed them to finally shift the narrative from a question, "Where are they?" to a statement, "Here they are. This is what happened. And they are loved." The case of Ethan and Maya Vance left an indelible mark, not just on the families it shattered, but on the fabric of the community and the protocols of law enforcement. Its legacy became a powerful lesson, a multifaceted reflection on the depths of human evil and the enduring power of human decency. On one hand, the story is a chilling study of unchecked greed. Marcus Thorne became a modern archetype of corporate sociopathy, a man who viewed human lives as mere externalities in a business equation. His actions served as a dark reminder that evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit and sits on charitable boards. The case forced the local community to look at the nature of wealth and influence with a more cynical eye, questioning the automatic respect afforded to the powerful. On the other, more hopeful hand, the story is a testament to unwavering love and the power of a promise. Sarah's 17-year quest for answers became a source of inspiration. She embodied the relentless spirit of those who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten. Her story demonstrates that a single determined voice can, over time, move mountains, or in this case, search the bottom of a lake. She ensured that Ethan and Maya were never just reduced to a file number or a piece of local folklore. They remained people, loved and missed. In the wake of the trial, significant changes were implemented in how missing persons cases were handled in remote areas throughout Washington state. The Vance Protocol, as it became known informally, now mandates a preliminary search of any significant bodies of water within a 5-mile radius of a person's last known location, especially when a vehicle is found abandoned nearby. The fatal assumption that had crippled the original investigation, that a car on the shore means the people are on the land, was officially struck from procedure. Advanced technology like side-scan sonar, once a specialized scientific tool, became a standard resource for law enforcement in such cases. The legacy of the case is therefore a duality. It is about the darkness that can hide in plain sight, but it is also about the light that refuses to be extinguished, the light of a sister's love, the light of a detective's diligence, and the clarifying light of truth itself, which, even after 17 years buried in the cold and the dark, finally found its way to the surface. The story of Ethan and Maya Vance is a reminder that the most peaceful landscapes can hide the most violent secrets, and that justice, though it may sleep for years, does not always sleep forever. It took a twist of fate and a new kind of technology to uncover a truth that greed had tried to bury forever. If this case struck you, and you want to see more true crime mysteries brought to light, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might be interested, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into unforgettable cases. We want to hear your thoughts. What part of this 17-year ordeal do you find the most shocking? The cold-blooded nature of the crime, the failures of the initial search, or the chance discovery that finally broke the case wide open? Tell us in the comments what you believe really happened in those first crucial hours at Serpent Lake.